Wes Craven is one of my favourite directors, top 3 for sure, and that is in large part to the Scream franchise and all it means to me as a horror fan and film fan. With that being said, the man is a legend for a reason. He's made multiple timeless horror classics that have boundless influence on the genre and the filmmakers that came after him. He's made some controversial movies, some admittedly pretty shitty movies, and quite a lot of porn actually. But I recently watched his 2005 werewolf film Cursed, and though it has a reputation of being really shitty, I massively enjoyed it and even did a video on it, so go and check that out if you care. But it inspired me to watch every Wes Craven film, the ones that I had seen and the ones that I haven't, and through that I've decided to sit and rank every single one of them for you here. I'm gonna go by his Letterboxd director's page, so that includes his TV movies as well. I'm excluding this French film because he's just one of the 18 collaborators who made it, and I'm also not including Casebusters since it isn't a feature-length film, which leaves us with 25 movies, so it's gonna be a long one, you can tell by the runtime. So this will be spoiler free for every movie, so let's just get right into it. At number 25 we have The Fireworks Woman, and this film is just a porno. I'm struggling to even find clips I can use on this website. I wouldn't have watched it if it hadn't come under his official filmography, but for anyone wanting to complete the man's catalogue, you can give this one a skip. I mean, technically this is directed by one of his pseudonyms, Abe Snake if you want to get pedantic, but in general it's a film about a woman, Angela, who is in love with her priest brother, Peter, and yes, you heard that right, brother. Angela has some kind of aura that just makes folks horny. Yeah, there's no real story here, however I will say this film has Wes Craven as a reoccurring character as a man named Nicholas Burns who wears a top hat, smokes cigars, sells fireworks, and something. I don't know, he's also kind of God, I think. I'm not entirely sure. It's a very ambiguous film, but you know, it's porn, so you can't expect too much. However, I will say there are some actual sequences of weirdly good directing, and it contains some surrealist aspects, and it's fairly experimental as far as 70s porn goes, so yeah, it's not really a movie, and that's why it lands at 25. Okay, so our first real movie isn't really a real movie, it's a TV movie, of which Craven made a few, but it's Night Visions. Now, I have so little to say on this film, more than any other film on this entire list, because it's kind of just a load of nothing. It is a quintessential TV movie. It's super low budget, the acting is shitty, the story is predictable, and aside from one slightly unexpected twist at the end, it's just a bland time that really isn't worth seeing unless you're doing a Wes Craven binge. So yeah, that's that. And next up is The Hills Have Eyes Part 2, and this is just a movie I dislike. There's some fun moments and the characters are okay, but it is the epitome of an unnecessary sequel, and not only does it add absolutely nothing to the world or story, it actually takes away from the first film, which is a bona fide classic. It reduces the big third act of that last film to basically a second act of a wasteful duology, and it teases Bobby in the first few minutes to not have him show back up for the entire movie. They also return the character of Ruby and then completely fail to give her anything interesting to do or go through, despite this being a perfect opportunity to do so. We waste half the movie showing flashbacks to the previous movie, which is just a constant reminder that we could be seeing a better movie right now. The mutants are much less intimidating and standoffish and scary and less of a looming threat. The film overall is a lot less intense and fun. It has very little going for it, and in my opinion was clearly made to capitalize on the success of the previous installment, but it isn't without merit entirely. We add in the character of Cass, who is blind, and I think the idea of handicapped horror is entirely underused. Bringing a blind woman to this situation in the middle of the desert brings a whole new level of horror to the situation and makes for some creative set pieces, and it's true. I mean, her scenes are the best in the film by a mile, but that isn't really saying much. The villains are dumb and don't make much sense, the set pieces are less thrilling, the characters are less likable, and even the potential that was there was squandered by lack of effort. It's the only Wes Craven movie aside from the porno that I genuinely dislike. The only reason it sits above Night Visions is a clearly better cinematic effort is being made, and also Cass is pretty great. And though I don't dislike this next movie, I do think it is a pretty lifeless time, which is my soul to take. Now, this movie is not bad, I will say that. It is honestly more competently made than a lot of the other films on this list. After all, this was Craven's second to last movie, so he had grown a lot as a filmmaker, but I just think for as smart as Craven was, he fell victim to the very ideas and tropes that he was toying with in Scream. Now of course, this doesn't have Kevin Williamson writing, but Wes Craven understood the horror genre so well. And the way he created a slasher so unstoppably predictable is kind of soul-crushing. Now, I can imagine this film is a lot better if you haven't seen a lot of murder mystery slasher movies. And honestly, that may be what Craven was trying to do, take it back to basics. I mean, even still in this era, there wasn't that many just basic slashers. It was kind of a forgotten genre, unless it was a remake, reboot, or sequel. In his old age, he may have become more sentimental and reminiscent of his early days and wanted to revisit rather than constantly subverting the genre. He probably just wanted to take part in it, but for me it just doesn't work and I don't ever see myself watching this again. The acting, especially from the intro, absolutely stinks, and Max Theriot, I think that's how you say his name, of Bates Motel fame was a really weak link in this. I wanted it to be better, and though it wasn't unbearable, I just found it a little bit, pardon the pun, soulless. And the next film is Wes's official debut, The Last House on the Left. Now, I know this film is a massive fan favourite for some, and its cultural impact on horror as well as Craven's career is very much understood. But I just don't connect with it. I think it's a very fine movie, and I love it for what it is, but I just think this film works very well in 1972, and beyond that, not so much. I haven't seen the 2009 remake, but I have no doubt it's a better composed film. Not a masterpiece, but probably improved. I just find this dragging quite a lot, and I never quite find myself overly invested in what's going on. Plus, some of the scenes are just a little bit uncomfortable for kind of no reason, and it is definitely a porn director's first attempt at something larger and more sinister, and in that aspect, it's impressive, but otherwise, it's not anything too exceptional. Which brings us to a lesser known Craven movie, the 1985 made-for-television film, Chiller. It's the story of a man who was cryogenically frozen and then brought back to life miraculously 10 years later. Craven did a few of these made-for-TV movies, and as far as this sort of genre of film goes, they actually aren't too bad. This is where I start to genuinely like every film. There's some heavy philosophical debate here about what happens to the soul when a person dies. If your whole being is made of mind, body and soul, and then you die and come back, though your mind and body have been restored, does the soul have an obligation to return too? And if not, what is to become of the mind and body? It's strangely deep for a silly sort of sci-fi horror movie made for TV in the 80s, and we have some real great actors making up the cast here, especially with Michael Beck, Beatrice Straight and Paul Zavino, who all give very amazing performances, which is to be expected. Beck especially, as he portrays this godless shell of a man in Miles who serves as our antagonist but also partially our protagonist. As is Marion, Casey and the Reverend, who are all pretty much getting equal screen time. So yeah, it isn't anything that's going to blow your mind, but I think it's a fine enough time that I wouldn't mind revisiting on another Craven watch through. Now to the only real non-horror movie on this list, Music of the Heart, and I don't know. Non-horror Wes Craven is so weird. Seeing his name come up on the opening credits of a beautiful film is different. Now, I will say as obvious, the film is very well made. It's a super heartwarming story based on a true story in fact, and when your two leads are Meryl Streep and Angela Bassett, you're guaranteed some good performances. But the drawback of this film is the pacing. I got near the end of the film and felt quite satisfied, looked at how long I had left since it was about to wrap up, and I saw that I had literally half the movie left. An absolute blow to the chest. It just feels like this film goes on forever, and though it's not necessarily a chore to get through, you do feel the full extent of that 2 hours. It's a film in the similar capillary as Dangerous Minds or Freedom Writers, or as my friend Zach puts it, it's a film you show at school. To me, it's something your mom would like, and for that it gets points. I mean, it's above these other films. Some I did find a bit of enjoyment out of, especially Chiller, but I just know I would never revisit this movie. I'm glad Wes expanded his reach outside of horror and proved that he could make movies in any genre and do it competently. I know he had desires to move from horror from as early as The Last House on the Left, but it never came to fruition. But after getting some real salt in the game, he was able to work on this film, and that's wonderful. It just isn't for me personally. But bringing it back to horror, we have Shocker, a movie that nearly works very well. It's a film about a serial killer who uses black magic to survive the electric chair and possess other bodies as he hunts down the kid who got him caught through seeing the murders take place in his dreams. It's a super interesting concept and one that could be done so much better now. This film is an absolute ball though, being honest. The concept is super goofy and fun. Mitch Pileggi as Horace Pinker is an unhinged performance that is gone too quickly, and aside from the awful visual effects, the third act is ridiculously fun. The horror elements are spectacular, like the deaths of the characters are horrific, and one of my favourite horror tropes is when a teen boyfriend buys an ugly ass piece of jewellery and the girlfriend loves it and that jewellery becomes a big symbol in the film, and this does it to perfection. There is so much dumbness in this movie. There's a scene where a TV static black magic ghoul demon thing says, "You got it, baby." And I think this film could do pretty well with a fun campy remake, and I definitely cast Colin Farrell as Horace Pinker. We have plenty of teenage talent that could pull off the rest of this cast, which, speaking of, there's a great Ted Raimi role who doesn't say much, but just seeing him makes me quite happy. Especially when, you put together the long history his brother Sam Raimi had with Craven. Also, fun fact, there's a very brief Heather Langenkamp cameo in the intro right here, which is a few years after she became the lead as Nancy in A Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a good best friend character in Rhino, our protagonist is campy and corny, the film is corny and cheap, but in the best way possible, but it is overall far too long. It could have been 20 minutes to about half an hour shorter if I'm being real. The VFX, though charmingly shit, are still shit, and considering the budget is considerably high for the time, well, for horror anyway, it does feel very cheap oftentimes. So that's why it's so low, but don't mistake me, I like every single film from now on, and this one is just a lot of fun. Which now brings me to probably the hottest take of the video. The Hills Have Eyes is next, which I recently watched for the first time and was actually planning on making a video on because I watched both this and the remake together, and I think the 2006 film is far superior. I mean, Wes Craven wanted to get that project off the ground himself, probably hinting towards the fact that he knew the story could have been done better, and there's far more potential in that concept than he originally put into the 77 classic. And again, I think this is just another case of a director being early in his career, finding his feet. But as a sophomore effort, this is astounding, especially when compared to The Last House on the Left. It is just so much better because it is truly a classic for a reason. There are some brilliant set pieces. Michael Berryman is absolutely iconic. The suspense that Craven would later master has the seeds of greatness planted here, and I just adore the vibes of this movie. Beast the dog is goated and gets their own hero storyline, which I love, and I think the storyline of Doug going from this kind of docile man to the vengeful father willing to do anything for his baby is brilliant. So yeah, it's a really good time, even if not my favourite. And just before we hit the top 15, at 16 we have Invitation to Hell, which is another made-for-TV movie, and honestly, if the budget wasn't so obviously constrained, you would not tell. It's Craven's take on a body snatcher's story. Think The Faculty, but instead of a school, it's a tech company, and instead of the faculty, it's members of a country club. I actually don't have much to say, I just think Craven handles this story very gracefully, and every single performance has given a lot to the experience. I found myself genuinely engulfed in the movie, and Matt Winslow is a very charismatic character that I actually care a lot about. The cinematographer is Dean Cundy, who worked on so many classics like The Fog, Halloween 1, 2 and 3, Psycho 2, The Thing, Jurassic Park and tons more, and it shows. This film does not look as cheap and tacky as it should for a 1980s goofy TV movie. I don't use the word zany often or even at all, but I think that accurately describes this time. I was not looking forward to this one at all, given its fucking No Limit Records poster, to the super obvious and corny name, and the fact that it was a TV movie in the 80s, but I'd say this is the film I was the most pleasantly surprised by that I hadn't seen before. Not my favourite by a long shot, but from an expectation level, this film absolutely crushed it. Don't go into it thinking it's going to be a bona fide horror classic or anything, but if you're into goofy, low-budget horror films from the 80s with fun concepts, this is definitely something to check out, and I'd definitely watch it again. Okay, so entering the top 15, we have a sort of cult classic film in Craven's filmography, Deadly Blessing. This film has a lot of fans, and I can definitely see why. It is a really good time, and I think even Craven himself knew he was onto something when making it. There is some of the seeds of his later movies, especially Scream and A Nightmare on Elm Street. There's the slasher tones and a lot of the feeling of Scream, never quite knowing who you can trust and all that stuff, and there's a big classic reveal at the end, and it just feels like an early draft of a Scream concept, but the seeds of A Nightmare on Elm Street are more so in the writing techniques. Especially the final moments, which I won't spoil, of course, and there's even this shot which is identical to the Elm Street classic shot of the bathtub, so I think if you love both Scream and A Nightmare on Elm Street and slasher mysteries in general, this is going to be at least a fun time to you. Which it is for me, but I just don't love it as much as many people do. I enjoyed it and I think it's made fantastically well and the best work Craven had made up until that point, but my main issue is that what I get from this film, I get from later movies and better. So yeah, it's gonna stay at number 15 for now, which is not a bad spot at all. I still love it, I promise. Okay, so at 14 is Vampire in Brooklyn, and now is a good time to mention that Wes Craven weirdly did a decent bit in ways of black horror. Between this, The Serpent and the Rainbow, and The People Under the Stairs, he was making a fair bit of horror with black cast that wasn't just simply in the blaxploitation subgenre. And Vampire in Brooklyn is unique in the ways that the film was actually penned and conceptualized by people other than Craven himself, and it was pushed forward mostly by Eddie Murphy and his brother Charlie Murphy. It's interesting because those two are a classic comedic pair, but they originally envisioned this movie as a straightforward horror movie, but it was Wes's idea to add in some of the comedy, which I think is a very smart choice given the talents of the cast. But also the Murphy brothers' original vision was to have Max, the villain of the film, to be an unsympathetic villain, a straightforward bad guy, but Craven also changed that. Charlie Murphy said, Maximilian wasn't going to have any redeeming qualities, but Wes taught us that we must get the audience to care about our characters, and even if they didn't know any vampires personally, they would at least have to identify with the type of person he was. And for this goal, Craven absolutely succeeded. Max is charismatic, and though we see him do some genuinely awful things, there is something endearing about him. Eddie also gives this genuinely great speech.
Humans fear what they don't understand, and they hate what they fear. Your father sacrificed himself so your mother could survive. That's what drove your mother insane.
It's a film that, though was an initial flop, has had some reassessment critically, and I'm quite glad it's received that retrospective love because there's some great visual effects, great moments of horror. I particularly love this scene of Max going full fucking Ivan Ooze, and there's some amazing bits of comedy.
Let's get the hell out of here. Do that. Look at this shit. Look at this shit. That's mom. He taking care of you.
So yeah, go and watch it if you want a fun horror film set in 1990s Brooklyn with vampires. However, I will say this is the film that probably gassed up Eddie into playing multiple characters in so many of his movies, and it just doesn't work there nearly as well as it did here. But yeah, good movie. Then we have a huge sleeper hit, which is 1982's Swamp Thing. I say this because a lot of people rank this very low, but God, I really loved it. For one, I don't think Craven gets anywhere near the credit he deserves for jumping on the comic book movie genre as early as he did. I mean, he did this in 1982, a few years after the first Reeve Superman, but like 7 years before Burton even touched Batman, and for all intents and purposes, he chose a completely more obscure character to work with, and I think he handles it very well. As an adaptation, it fucking reeks, but as a movie, I love it a lot. The costume for Swamp Thing is ugly and clearly just a dumb rubber suit, but something about the practical, rugged nature of it, as well as the beautiful swamp location, is golden. There are some really fucking dumb, goofy ass transitions that could rival even Star Wars. The emotional beats hit unusually well. Adrienne Barbeau is an absolute icon. Jude is a great comic relief character with great heart, and it has the appeal and charm of old Universal monster movies. And I'm pretty sure that's what Wes was going for. I mean, just look at the poster. It's a definite homage to that classic monster movie era. The score is gorgeous, and I'm a simple man. I love seeing two dudes in silly rubber Power Ranger villain costumes duking it out in a swamp. So yeah, it's a classic superhero movie which is definitely aged by today's standards, but I love it for the foundational work he puts into making the bedrock of the genre. And next up we have Wes Craven's first contribution to black horror, which is The Serpent and the Rainbow. And I unfortunately have not a lot to say about this one. Despite me genuinely loving it, I couldn't tell you with too much certainty why. I mean, I guess first of all, voodoo is objectively fucking sick. And the unusual setting of Haiti really sets this film apart from a lot of other horror movies. The one thing Wes became very great at was putting horror movies in the most unlikely places. And though his classics are set in the suburbs, this has Haiti, there's the swamp in Swamp Thing, the desert in Hills Have Eyes, Brooklyn in Vampire in Brooklyn, and even a plane in Red Eye, which isn't too much of a horror but still. He was great at finding unique locations to set horror films in, and even horror set pieces in more obvious films like The Boiler Room in Elm Street movies and such. But to bring it back around to Serpent and the Rainbow, Haiti is an untapped resource in terms of beauty and horror aesthetic in film. We also have the dad from Casper and a real fucking cheetah in this movie, and that's pretty sick too, I guess. But yeah, I think this is the highest quality Craven film that has flown under the radar over the years. It's the one that I'm honestly surprised doesn't have more of a reputation for how uniquely it handles itself, from the premise, the location, the conflicts to their resolution. But the one film I think is its most underrated is our 11th spot, Summer of Fear, or also known as Stranger in Our House, but mostly Summer of Fear. Again, it's another TV movie, but this one is genuinely better than most theatrically released horror movies. It's a film made on an unbearably small budget and hides it very well through clever uses of technique and writing and directing. Plus, it really helps when Linda Blair is your lead, who we all know is just a wonderfully fantastic actress that gives 100% in every single film. And this one, if you don't know, is about a family who suffers a tragic loss, leading to our protagonist Julia's cousin Rachel coming to live with them. Slowly, everything starts to go to shit for our Julia, whilst Rachel starts to have the greatest life possible. Julia suspects Rachel of being a witch, and that suspicion slowly becomes more and more plausible. It's an enthralling time, and I find myself so genuinely invested in our world and characters, and I fucking hate Rachel so much. She pisses me off. She's a prick. I love Julia though. Linda Blair is a fucking queen, and it helps that the performances are all giving 100%, and brilliant storytelling by Craven is again present. Go and see it if you can. It is a really worthwhile time. It comes and goes at an ample pace with very minimal effects, very little glitz and glamour, just a very simple story told especially well. Which I guess brings us to our top 10, and starting it off is Deadly Friend. This film is basically Megan before Megan. It warns us of the danger of AI, which was very ahead of its time, and the mediocre reception this film has across the board just tells me that people don't enjoy fun. So before I try to sell this movie to you, a quick fun fact, but the robot in this movie, BB, served as inspiration for the Star Wars sequel's BB-8 droid. And now I'm going to show you a clip, and if this doesn't make you want to watch this movie and give it 5 stars on Letterboxd, I don't understand you as a person, and I never will. And moving on to 9, we have Cursed. Now, I did an entire video about this film as previously mentioned, so I don't really want to get too much into it, and I'd like to redirect you to that video for my full thoughts, but I think this film is massively misunderstood, and there is precious little about it that I don't enjoy. Some of the CGI sucks, and the practical effects are campy, but they're fun, and the cast is so dynamic, and this is another ode to those classic monster movies, especially Wolfman, and this makes sense when considering Beauty and the Beast, Frankenstein, and Nosferatu are all in Wes Craven's favourite horror films. I wish more people would give this film a chance, because I think a lot more people would like it if they cared enough to see it for what it's trying to be and not for what they want it to be. So yeah, go and check my video for my full thoughts. Then we have Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I only saw for the second time ever on this binge, and I have to say it's even better on a rewatch. Wes Craven was doing the meta thing a lot in his work, and he has always been into that, and New Nightmare was his first real big step into trying it out. And it's just such a wonderfully unique film that honestly cannot be replicated. The fact Craven stepped back into the Elm Street franchise for the 7th movie and gave it a fresh voice after the series dropped in quality over the years is goated stuff. I loved seeing Wes Craven, Robert Englund, and Heather Langenkamp playing themselves in this fictionalized version of our reality. I think the way Craven actually puts together these characters and shapes their motivations and morals based on real life personas is genius. There's a lot of commentary on horror and its effects on children, which is an unexpected thread, and the whole film is executed with such precision and focus, and you can tell that Craven really put his heart and soul into making it. I also love how he kind of stripped back Freddy Krueger to what he was initially, which is a really sinister villain. He became a lot more jokey as the movies went on, becoming a more comedic and honestly likable guy, but Craven's original vision was a genuine horror-inducing demon, and he brings that back with absolute fullness in this. Not only in the writing and England's performance, but in the design, which is much more lifelike and realistic, showing ligaments and tendons closer to Craven's original vision for the Krueger design. It's just an all-round banger, and it pains me to not put it in the top 5, but there's just so much greatness to come up that it's stuck at 8 for now. At 7, we finally have our first Scream entry in this list, and I should have said, but every film from New Nightmare onwards I adore more than you could ever know. So yeah, the first Scream entry, and it's gonna be Scream 3. Now we all know Scream 3 is known as the weakest in the franchise, or at least the weakest of the Craven 4, and I'd have to agree with the general consensus on this one. But regardless of that, I still think this movie is fucking incredible. So famously, this film had a lot of production issues. First of all, Kevin Williamson did not return to write this one. He did, however, write like a 20 to 30 page draft outline, which actually included Matthew Lillard's return as Stu Macher. However, times became really tough in media as the Columbine High School massacre occurred, and there was heavy scrutiny on video games, films, and TV, and generally all media for their violent effects on the youth. So as a result, that draft was mostly thrown away, and they rewrote the film, and it involved a lot less gore than previous movies. And yeah, the background of this film is kind of fascinating. You should do some reading on it, but regardless of all of that, Craven somehow created an incredibly thrilling time that earned its place in the franchise. I do, however, hate the reveal in this film. Not so much the reveal, but the implications of it and how it changes previous movies, particularly the first. But aside from that, the movie is a solid installment. I love the Randy cameo. I think it's just an overall really fun time, fun location, fun new characters. And I have to say, the scariest thing in the film is Courtney Cox's bangs. Then, just missing out on the top 5, we have 2005's Red Eye, starring Cillian Murphy and Rachel McAdams, and I've been seeing this movie getting kind of a revival lately, and I'm absolutely for it. It's probably because Cillian Murphy is so popular right now due to the fact, Oppenheimer is doing crazy numbers, but this film would not be getting the attention if it did not deserve it. It's less of a horror film and more of a crime thriller, but the genre doesn't matter too much. All you really need to know is Cillian Murphy plays a guy trying to execute an assassination by ways of kidnapping Rachel McAdams and holding her hostage on a plane where the majority of the movie takes place. It was the first time I ever really remembered noticing how great of an actor Murphy is, and it's just such a fun ride. I don't have any in-depth thoughts on why I love it, I just do. It's a simple premise, a fairly different movie for Craven, great performances, and co-written by Cole Ellsworth, who wrote Disturbia, which I did a video on, and he also wrote The Last House on the Left remake shortly after this. No doubt being chosen by Craven himself from this experience, so if you want to watch a fun and just all-round solid mystery and crime thriller which has Brian Cox playing a concerned dad, this is the one. The only reason it isn't in the top 5 is because Scream 4 is just that fucking good. I know a lot of people have some venom for this entry, and personally I think those people are on that 1980s crack. Yes, the Vaseline filter is a bit weird, and I'd love to see a version of this film released without it, but the filter really does not bother me as much as it does other people. For me, the mystery is genuinely intriguing, more so than the previous installment, and it did what the last one especially struggled to do, which was make me care for the whole cast of characters. Kirby being a fan favourite was bound to happen, and the reveal in this film was genuinely the most shocking reveal since the very first film in my opinion, and the whole final act post-reveal is probably the best third act in the whole series aside from the first. A beautifully golden movie, and to say it was Craven's very last movie, I think it was a very worthwhile send-off, and it just makes me very glad this ended up being his last opposed to My Soul to Take. It's a good commentary on reboots, which were of course very popular around the time. Craven even having his own remakes and reboots just before this. There's a great returning cast, a great new cast, there's iconic lines, iconic moments, iconic scenes. This is just an iconic film. I adore it. Which leads to our number 4, which I adore just a little bit more, A Nightmare on Elm Street. An absolute bona fide classic movie. Not just classic horror film, a classic film in general. Nancy is really one of the all-time final girls, and the way Craven makes his final girls just such badasses and not damsels in distress is phenomenal, and the influence of this film knows no bounds within this genre. The film's inspiration comes from a few articles written in the LA Times about a few men in America that died during nightmares inexplicably, and then combining that with Craven pulling from his own childhood experiences of seeing an old man that terrified him, and there's just so much background to this, and you can honestly tell. Everything just seems so thought out and layered and processed through years of effort. The timeless effects this movie pulls off are astounding, and still to this day, there are some shots and sequences that are not only iconic but technical feats, and are still impressive by today's standards. I mean, look at this. This is fucking crazy. How do you pull this off? Yes, we all know about the crazy blood coming out of the bed thing, but this is stupid. How good does this look? And Robert Englund, I think, gives his best performance as Freddy in this movie, and as I previously said for New Nightmare, Krueger is genuinely scary in this film, and I think it's the way he should always be. I don't mind a joke every now and then like he is in Dream Warriors with, welcome to primetime bitch, but the comedic side of him should never take over his whole personality. I think the imagery of this movie is truly iconic, and I don't think there's any question as to why this film kicked off one of the most popular and respected horror franchises of all time. It very narrowly misses the top 3 because I just love one movie that much more, and it's The People Under the Stairs. A film partially inspired by a true story, but it's a film that takes our protagonist, who is a literal child, and puts him through probably the most depressing circumstances any protagonist in any Craven movie is put through. This film creates the two villains to be such insanely ugly souls that you start to genuinely empathize and root for the cannibals in the basement. Fool is one of my favourite horror protagonists of all time, and to not only have him survive his circumstances through pure ingenuity, but also to have him go back and not just be a survivor but a hero because it was the right thing to do is beautiful. There's great commentary on race relations during the Reagan era and in general, as well as the harrowing concept of gentrification and its implications for minority families who are stuck in an impoverished life oppressed by their own government, and it's all done with incredible nuance. It's a darkly funny movie with strong political themes wrapped up in a depressing time with an ultimately uplifting ending. But for our penultimate movie we have Scream 2, and fuck. Look man, I got like nothing to say at all, and I know that's kind of crazy for the second place, but I have seen this movie so many times that what I love about it has kind of become so muddled and blended into one big ball of adoration. I mean, like, I love the costuming. I mean, Sydney / Nev Campbell is just serving looks. I love Randy in this movie more than the others, and all of the returning cast are great in general. I love the way this film expands the world, bringing back the character of Cotton Weary, who was only mentioned in the first film, and taking Sydney to college and trying to move her past her previous experiences. The meta-commentary on the idea of sequels and them being by definition alone inferior films is quite hilarious, and they somehow capture the magic again, and it is once again crazily unpredictable. I also think it's really funny how Randy is presented in all of these films as the ultimate film nerd, but he actually gets a lot of things wrong, including the aliens quote, which he actually corrects someone else on who is in fact in the right. Plus, his dismissal of the superior sequels listed shows his kind of ignorance to what kind of movie he's in and explains his character's destination. The intro to this film is just brutal, and though I think the new characters aren't as iconic as previous ones, Timothy Olyphant is pure electric in his role as Mickey. What a movie, what a time, what a reveal, what a lady, what a night. But number one can only be one movie, and that's of course the original 1996's Scream. I would really like to do a video on this movie one day because it is genuinely one of my favourite movies of all time, like top 5 material, top 3 even. Sydney is the ultimate final girl, and in my opinion the second greatest is Nancy. Laurie Strode is for sure great and probably third, but these two are my girls for real. They're the first I think of, but Sydney just embodies that final girl energy. And it all starts here. The woman is a goddamn survivor, and not just a survivor, but a badass, and my life would not be the same without her or this film. Also, of course, the commentary on horror is the ultimate demonstration on how to poke fun at something and play with its cliches and tropes without looking down on it. It truly is a love letter, an ode to the genre that made Craven who he is, and the genre that Craven himself helped make great. See, these cliches and tropes are not only poking fun at horror, but also ultimately Craven himself, since he was very foundational to creating a lot of the ideas and concepts Scream toys with. And Matthew Lillard as Stu Marker is one of my favourite performances of all time, as is honestly Skeet Ulrich as Billy, Courtney Cox as the iconic Gail Weathers, and of course David Arquette as the fan favourite Dewey. But there is just too much greatness. Rose McGowan, Jamie Kennedy, and even Drew Barrymore, which then brings me around to talking about how clever this movie is again, and how expertly placed and cast that first 10 minutes is. Ugh, everything is just so iconic. I say that word a lot, but it's iconic and is ultimately the reason I have a ghost face tattoo. The best film in my favourite horror franchise, it's my number one. And that's it. Every Wes Craven movie logged and ranked, even the porn one. It's been a very long video and I'm glad to have finally got round to it. You know, I said Craven is one of my favourite filmmakers, and this binge has only strengthened that belief because even the lesser films on this ranking are some really enjoyable and masterful times. He was such an inventive soul and creative genius. He expanded his creative territory in so many types of subgenre and genres in general, locations and horror villain archetypes. I mean, he touched on serial killers, werewolves, killer AI, voodoo, zombies, witches, dream demons, domestic terrorists, ghosts, inbred cannibals, revived soulless madmen, vampires, rapists, DC swamp monsters, and even the devil itself. The loss of his creative energy is definitely felt, and I'm glad to see his energy and influence carry on through the Scream franchise and all other slashers that have come after. And I think that just about does it. So leave me your rankings below. Even if you haven't seen all of the films, I'd love to see where you rank what you have seen. Link to the letterboxd version of this list will be in the pinned comment, and let me know what you think of this video. I read every single comment and reply to as many as possible, and whether it's a film from the master of horror or not, as always, keep watching movies.